Hello, and thanks so much for checking in for another lesson. This is lesson 5. It corresponds with chapter 8 in your manual. In this lesson, we'll be talking about post-completion management functions. If you'll look in the table of contents section in the front of your manual, you can see the different sections there, and much as we did in the last chapter, we'll be going down along the same set of functions as are listed there in the table of contents. By post-completion, what we mean essentially is things that you do or you need to do after the job has truly been completed. After, in other words, the tech has done all the work and the job's done and you're ready to tally it up as a completed sale. There's several elements here. The first of which basically is to enter the fact that you completed your sale into the Service Desk Sales Journal, which keeps track of all of your completed sales. I'm going to press F4 on my keyboard. And what you'll see right here is what we call the sales journal, journal of sales. Basically, there's one line for each entry reflecting a different sale. For example, here we've recorded that at 4:19. We were recording the completed sale that was done by RW, the technician. It was old slash or hyphen Neves is the kind of name combination we're using here. It was actually done for Old Republic, and the homeowner's name was Neves, invoice number 65064. The first column here is the merchandise amount, which was 0. Merchandise sold, I should say. Second column is the parts amount sold, which was $136.92 on this sale. $35 for the service call, $96 in labor, $10.61 sales tax, for a total of $278.53. This last number, a 2, means that it was a billed sale. A 1 would mean that it was a paid sale. The first number here in the column, by the way, is just an ordinal number that indicates its record position. Here in the sales journal, I can page up and go through. I can do all kinds of searches and so on. Various things I can do here, but this is where you can look record by record at each record of your completed sales. I'm showing you this in advance so you'll understand what we're creating when we go through the sales enter process. We're basically creating these individual records here that reflect each of our past or completed sales. Now, how do we create those entries? Well, I'm going to escape out of that form, and I'm going to hit F, scratch that. F9 won't work so well in the context I'm in recording this, because it turns out F9 is a key that starts and stops the recording process in the utility I'm using to record this tutorial. So instead of hitting F9, I'm going to click up here where it says Sales Enter, which is of course the position of the buttons that corresponds with the F9. And that will bring up what we call the Sales Entry Program, Sales Enter Form. I guess we're not perfectly consistent in the term we use, but the idea is this little purple form is the form that we use to create those individual sales records that we saw here. This is where we actually make the entries. Now you might notice I've got a purple entry line here, and immediately above that are the last or the preceding most recent 10 sales entries that were made. Now when you first make your first few entries, there won't be any there because you haven't made any yet. But the idea is, let's suppose you got a stack of invoices that represent completed sales, and you're working on them and a telephone calls in, so you have to pause, and then you're not sure where you left off at. Well, you'll see the most recent ones made here as a reminder where you left off at in your sequence of making entries. So that's just the reason we show those there, to kind of help you with that. Plus it kind of helps you understand the sequence of items we're putting in. Now the first item here, the sequential ordinal number and the date, we won't put in. Those are basically Service Desk deduces those. But basically we're going to be entering the text initial, a sort of phrase for the name that's involved. If it's a major high volume client that's being billed, it will be that person's or that client's abbreviation followed by a hyphen and then the last name of the customer. Otherwise it will just be the last name of the customer, such as you see here. And then the invoice number, then the amount of merchandise sold. By merchandise, we're basically, you could use the column for whatever you want, but typically it's used to refer to major appliances as opposed to just parts. Then parts amount, then service call amount, then labor amount. sales tax amount and total. Actually, the sales tax amount will be assumed for you. To be more specific, or actually so you know what's assumed and what's not, we have this little instruction here. For each completed sale, type these items of data, each separated by a comma. The text initial, customer name, invoice number, merchandise sold, parts sold, service call sold, labor sold, total sold, and the pay code. That's that last column here, the pay code, which again is a 1 if it was if the job's paid for, a 2 if the job is being billed. So how do we do that? Basically, I'll just start typing in the information here. Let's say the technician was, I'll put my initials, pretend like I finished this job, and the customer's name was Shulman, and its invoice number is 651.79. Suppose I got the stack of invoices in front of me that I'm reading this information off of. Merchandise sold was 0. Parts amount sold was $30.79. Service call amount was 50. Added labor amount was 40. Total amount was 123.18. And let's suppose it was paid for. That makes it a pay code 1. So I've got that whole string of information in there, which corresponds with the series you see there, each item separated by a comma. I hit enter on my keyboard, and as you can see, it's inserted this into the list. It's inserted it into the list, but it hasn't actually saved it for me yet. It's sort of there temporarily pending being saved. I could click here on save and cause it to be saved, but let's suppose I just hit exit on the keypad. It's going to ask me if I want to save. That's the default. I'll just hit enter on my keyboard and say yes. And I can come here and we'll see that sure enough it's been saved to here. And if I go back to the sales enter form, it's now officially in there, more or less. I don't say why more. I don't know why I say more or less. It really is in there. Anyway, in a typical scenario, we'd make a whole series of entries showing each of our completed sales. Now, one thing I should point out here: this method of entry, where we're typing a series of textual items, each separated by a comma, for any of you that are comparative old-timers in terms of using computers, certainly it seems more reminiscent of the old DOS type of environments than it does of modern Windows. But there's a reason why we've set it up this way in spite of the fact that we're thoroughly Windows here. The reason is because this is an operation that you'll have probably one person in your organization assigned to do. And that person will be sitting down with a stack of invoices every day doing it. For the kind of task that you do with great repetition like that, it's actually faster and easier once you get used to the inputting process to do it with separations by commas in a single line of text like this than it is to be tabbing from one box to the next. It will seem more awkward at first, but believe me, trust me, once that person whose task it is to do this gets used to doing it, it will go way faster. Another thing I should mention is that the system is set up to do all kinds of checks and cross-checks for this string of data here to make sure that everything makes sense, that it corresponds with everything else in the system, that each number corresponds with itself. In other words, everything balances and lines up and so on. So the person that's doing this can sort of be typing in with reckless abandon, so to speak, as fast as they can, confident that if they made a mistake as they're entering stuff, it will be caught by the system and they'll be warned. Anyway, let's do a couple more entries just to show you more how it's done. Okay, I've placed a couple of tickets in front of me so that I can do this. I have one here that was completed by Dave Summer. DS, it's the last name on it's Turner, and invoice number 651.92, and let's see, 0, 0, $50 service call, 0 for the labor, and $50 total, and let's say it was paid. And now I'm getting a little warning. It's doing one of those checks that I told you about. And it says, sorry, under that invoice number, the job's current file shows you should be using a customer name of Hodel. Well, no, I looked down. The name's definitely Turner. And then I double checked the invoice number. Oh, I read it wrong. It was supposed to be 651.62. So I'll hit escape. I'll change that to 62. Hit enter again. And now, what it was doing right there, when you saw it moving fast, is it was looking to make sure that we had the $50 in our funds journal showing that we'd collected that money from them, and it's telling us that it's searched and can't find it. In fact, it can't find that amount. And it's giving me some options here. I'm going to continue with the entry as is. It's giving me a little further warning. And actually, it's not going to let me it's not going to allow me to make this entry claiming it's been paid, absent having found the funds receipt in the funds journal, unless I use my password, which I'm doing here to just sort of override it because I don't want to deal with that. But that's just a further illustration of how the system checks and cross-checks to make sure that everything lines up. So this entry is tentatively in the system, and I'll go on to the next entry here. And let's see here. This job was done by Jim Dillon, JD, and the name is Tora Greasy, and the actually I don't have actual prices on what I'm looking at. In real life you would. Let's say it's a $50 service call and $35 in labor and a total of $85, and it's a bill job. Oh, I left some items out. Actually, I did that on purpose just to show you. The merchandise amount was 0, and let's say the parts amount was 0. So now we've got, by the way, do you notice how that message worked? It just let me know there's not enough items there, so I know, whoops, I left out one or more items in the string. Actually, let's try putting in too many. It'll tell me, oops, I don't have a valid invoice number. Okay, let's put in a valid invoice number, 645.10. The real point I'm trying to make here is the system just checks. Now it tells me I got too many items, which I knew. Again, I did that on purpose. Now I've got the right amount of items, but the system has found that under that invoice number, I should be using a customer name of AHS Tora Greasy, or actually the first several letters of Tora Greasy, which is true because it's a bill job for American Home Shield. It's asking me if I'm certain it's the correct invoice number. Service desk will fix the enter name segment for me. So I'm going to go ahead and let it do that. And now it's bringing up this little light purple form, which is the system via which it creates the accounts receivable record, pursuant to which the system will then manage the accounts receivable. It's asking me to confirm if everything's correct here. Notice it's filled in the amount paid to date here is 35. It found that for me in the funds journal based on entries we'd made as part of post-action reports. All of this looks sensible, so I'll go ahead and click on OK. And it's inserted this entry in here for me as a pay code 2 entry, meaning that it's a billed item. So I've made 2 entries here. I'll escape. I'll hit enter to confirm saving. And those 2 added items are in there. Plus, if I go here to my accounts receivable form, here's the accounts receivable record that was just created. Notice it shows the 35 paid to date, the $85 total, and so on. By the way, one detail maybe I didn't mention back in the sales enter form, you notice we actually didn't enter this amount, the sales tax amount. It deduced that amount based on these amounts and made sure that the total with whatever amount of sales tax should be applicable was correct for adding in these amounts. It deduces the sales tax, by the way, based on the sales tax rates that you've indicated here in your settings form. So everything just ties together like mad. And that basically is a sales enter system. Oh, one more thing I should show you though. Let's take one of those jobs. Let's take Tora Greasy that we just did. We'll go to the current jobs form here. I'll do a name search on Tora. And, oh, I guess it has one R. Name T-O-R. And we'll go to the bottom of the history section here, and you see it made this entry for us on 4/19. GR recorded bill completion to sales journal for $85. And I also put the job record into recorded to sales journal status for us. Now, you might notice that this recorded to sales journal and marked for deletion, these 2 status categories are kind of in their own little rectangle here. That's symbolic of the fact that these 2 categories are different. If a job record is in any of these categories and you're working in a normal mode, a non-restricted learning mode, in other words, a mode that's not restricted to a special learning context. If a job record is in any of these statuses, it will stay in the current jobs file. But if it's in this status, it's ready to be moved out of the current jobs file and into the archived jobs file, which again you view from here. We saw that before. And of course, if it's marked for deletion, it's ready to just be deleted the next time the jobs archive routine runs, which can be done in any of several ways, and I think we may get to that later in this series, or otherwise you can read about that in your manual. So anyway, those things happened, all in consequence of that sales enter process. And I think that's as deep as we need to get into that here for this section of this lesson. And we'll now go on to the next. Actually, I think what I'll do here in terms of this video lesson is reverse subsections B and subsection C in the manual. The way the manual has it, managing accounts receivable B comes before C, which is using the specialized facility for finished form documents. I'm going to do C first, and then I'll do B. Again, C we'll do right now, which is using the specialized facility for finished form documents. That basically involves this form right here. Set up for finished form documents, you can see is the title there. And the whole purpose of this form is if you are involved in, after the job is done, needing to make any kind of a special presentation document of a kind that fills in everything, basically, well, to make the distinction. You might recall when we created a job up front from the call sheet, let's escape out of there, we put in all the information, we clicked on Job Sale. The kind of ticket that was printed up at that point in time simply had the initiating information. I wish this video was set up, or I had set it up so I could show you pictures, but I haven't done that. Anyway, to create the initiating document, actually if you look in the back page of your manual, you'll see what I'm referring to. Well, initiating document isn't an adequate term because it creates the invoice that is your working document, and typically, for most operations at least, it's the one and only document you really need on the job. The technician takes this and fills in the rest by hand as he does the work, and leaves a copy of the customer, and it gets turned in. I say initiating document because Service Desk types all the upfront information into the ticket, and the rest gets written in by hand. Anyway, this context here, this finished form context, is for those operations that have circumstances where they need to create a document after the fact that fills in everything, fills in a description of the work done, parts used, charges, total, and so on. That's what this finished form context is for. It's most often applicable, probably more than for any other purpose, if you're involved in doing warranty work and have to make warranty claims, in which case you can bring up the standard NARDA form here and fill it in, or actually the system will fill it in for you under the proper circumstances, which I'll show you here shortly. Another very possible use of this context, whoops, got out of it there, is if you're doing upfront counter sales, either of parts or merchandise, more often of parts because we're not that well set up for selling new merchandise as of yet. And you want to print out a ticket at the counter that prints out everything for your customer. You can also use this form. In fact, when you go from the job sale here, let's say you're doing a counter sale. I don't know why, sometimes in this demo I'm losing my caps lock. You're doing a counter sale, you'll probably actually have your customer's name in there. You'll probably have in their telephone number, whatever that happens to be, if not their address too, depending on whether you want that for your counter sales or not. And what you want to do is come down here to the description box and type in, actually you want to type in purchase item, but there's a quick key for that in this context. You can just hit F1. That little magic word there, and then you could describe things, parts, blah, blah, whatever the case is. But anyway, that little magic phrase there tells the system you're going to want to go to the finished form context after you click on Job Sale here. We'll go ahead and click on OK, and you can see it takes us right to here. Let's go to Generic, say that's the form type we want. And you can see that whatever information we had on the call sheet, it's filled in for us here. It's given us the invoice number and so on. And we could go ahead and let's say we're selling them a 2 of some part number, whatever it happens to be, drum rollers. I know that wasn't the right part number. I'm just kind of going along here. And we sell those for $5.49. You can see it's filled in the extended amount for us, the total, the those amounts we'll presume here are 0. We could change them if we wanted to, the sales tax, and the extended total for us. And we could simply click on print, and the system would go ahead and print up a ticket that looks very much like this form for us in its entirety, and that would facilitate doing the counter sale. So that's one use, going directly from the call sheet to create this counter sale type ticket. You can see there's 3 different kinds of forms you could select. It's inserted the invoice number here for us. Anyway, that's one possible use. I'm going to escape out of here now because I want to show you the more likely use, which would be supposing you've done a warranty job for a client and you want to create a warranty claim on that job. Let's see, I'm just going to find a job record here that I think let's suppose I want to make a warranty claim on this job right here, which I just brought up in the jobs archived form. I can click on print here. I could have hit P or Alt P, and then I want to go to the finished form document. You can see that it's preloaded the invoice number for that job in here for me, and now I can simply select NARTA, and the system is filling in. I'm just scrolling up and down here. It's filled in virtually all of the relevant information for me, which obviously is very handy. I just notice here that I'm looking at an older version here of the form that doesn't have as much labeling as we've since added. So I'm going to pause for a second and fix that. That's better. I took a pause and I fixed it. I was probably looking at the version of the form that existed back in April of 2000, and actually doing this video in November of 2002. The form has been substantially improved. So anyway, it's filled in virtually all the relevant information for us. I might want to do a little bit of editing here, particularly in the service performed box, because the system tried to go through the job's history to pull the relevant history. For example, we wouldn't need to have that in there, so I could just delete that. It's listed the part that we used. It found that in the information. It would have filled in this item and this item for me if, in fact, for the customer, for the high volume client involved, I had those numbers filled into the quick entry template, which I'm going to go back to call sheet here so I can bring up quick entry template. Let me just suppose General Electric, for example. I'll click on edit. Had I had those numbers filled in this box and this box, it would have filled in those for me. In fact, there's a whole bunch of conveniences, like if I had default amounts for service call and labor, it would fill in those amounts in here for me. So there's a whole bunch of different things you can do. You can read about those in detail in your manual. Let's see, let's get everything arranged back the way it needs to be here. Okay. Absent having them filled in, which again it would have done if I had it set up properly for the purpose. You could type them in here, do any other final editing you want to do. And then depending on which way you use for the particular warranty company, manufacturer, you could either print a copy of this. It actually prints just the text for this particular form. So what you'd want to have is a NARTA form, a pre-printed NARTA form, and then it would essentially print the text into the spaces for you. Or you could click on transmit, and depending on which processor you needed to use, you'd simply, let's suppose Service Bench, for example. You'd here select the file name that you want to save the claim under, and you'd click on save, and it would save the claim under that file number, and then you can add as many claims to that file name as you want. And when you got as many claims in it as you want, you transmit, actually you upload that claim to Service Bench or whoever else the processor is. Now I might mention in terms of sort of a promise here, that in terms of for Service Bench, we will soon have a mechanism where those uploads take place automatically in real time without you even having to worry about it. I don't have anything on the horizon for the other processors in that regard, but that will be happening with Service Bench fairly soon. Again, I'm talking right now, November of 2002. Okay, so that's how you create your claims, and or your, say, finished counter documents or other things. Again, there's 3 different kinds of forms you can use, regardless of which form you use. Let's see here, it's giving us a little option. It will fill in the form. This is a form that is designed to print in the format that you see in the back of the manual. We refer to it as a custom form because particularly, this item is particularly made so you can set it up to print on your own invoice format, whatever it happens to be. And then we have this generic form. And this generic form, it's set up such that it's designed really to print onto a blank sheet of paper. The way it's set up, it will print all these label and frame areas onto the blank sheet of paper, so you don't have to have a pre-printed form. It looks very good done onto a blank sheet of paper, and that's probably another reason why it looks good on a counter ticket. The system's also set up so, of course, it inserts your name and address and so on here. You can also set it up so that in the alternative it puts your graphic logo up here. So there's a lot of flexibility in that system. By the way, did I mention the key to bring that up is Alt F4? And just to remind, you can of course find that in command summaries up here, access via function keys and so on. Okay, now that I've explained the basic, I'll escape out of this too, the basic operation of that finished form environment, I want to tie it in with 2 other things. Earlier in, I guess, the last tutorial, we showed you this form. The post-action report fill in the blanks method form. Let's see if I can come up with the invoice number to type in here. Oh, that's not good. Okay, can't find that one. Okay, well, I know I'm not set up properly in this old system for this new form. Anyway, you might notice, I know what I'll do. I'll hit F7 and go to what I know is a good record. Then I'll do Shift F7. Okay, that works better. All right. I'll go ahead and accept that appointment. So I've got this form fully in front of us. You might notice this little checkoff item here that says, when job is done, link automatically to post-completion tasks. Let's go ahead and check that. And it's just giving a little message there to confirm for me what the purpose of that thing is. Remember what my password is here. Some of these settings require a password to change. And the reason why, in case you're wondering, is they change the entire system. Every computer in your network, when one computer changes this thing, will have their same value changed. It's a net-wide setting. Going back to the concept that's shown here, the purple settings are net-wide and the green ones are local. Anyway, wherever in terms of design we've contemplated that it's something the manager may want to have set in one way and not want people to have the ability to change independently on their own differently, we've required a password, so that's why you saw a password required here. It says, when job is done, link automatically to post-completion tasks. I'm just going to demonstrate for you what that means. We'll go ahead and do a pretend report on this. I'm not going to put in the times. Let's say he replaced defrost heater, and I'm not going to create a unit info sheet there. I'm not going to order any parts, even though I used a part from stock. I'm going to skip that. I'm going to skip this too. I'm just going to click on, well, actually we would make it look better if we put some stuff in. Let's say he used a defrost heater. Let's see here. I can't remember any part numbers, so I'm just typing in defrost heater. Defrost element. Let's say he used that one. Okay. And, well, let's go ahead and fill this in too. Create new model number SKU. I know that's not, I think that's a dishwasher prefix. When I'm doing these tutorials, I'm trying hard to think about what I'm going to talk about, and I don't think that well about other things. Okay, I'll hit enter and insert it, and I think we'll just leave it at that. Well, let's go ahead and put in those times. It will look better in what I'm about to show you. In fact, we could add here manually defrosted evap. Okay. Now we'll click on OK. And as we showed you in the last lesson, it's filled in this information for us. It will have taken that other information and put it in other places. But because I have this checked right here, it's done something else. Integrated post-completion functions, the title says. To which context do you wish to proceed? Finish forms or record to sales journal? The idea here is when you have this checked, once you do the post-completion or the post-action report, I should say, and if this is checked, if the job is checked as being done, it assumes you then need to move to the other functions that I've shown you as part of this lesson, the post-completion functions of either doing a finished form for claims or proceeding to the sales journal. I'm just going to take the default here, hit enter on my keyboard. It takes me here. It's preloaded that invoice number. I'll select NARDA. By the way, I could hit N on my keyboard instead. What's this? Unable to find a value for B based on past entries. Oh, it couldn't find the value for the part that I used. Okay, I'll suppose the value is 2518. And now you can see it's filled in the claim form for me as much as it could. I didn't have any default service call and labor amounts, so let's go ahead and fill some things in here. The reason it's done the minus 2518 here is because most for handling is because that's a way of subtracting back out from the invoice the amount of the part, since most manufacturers don't want to be billed for the part amount, but let's say this one does. I'll just erase that. We get the total. We could print or transmit it just like I showed you before. Let's go ahead and say we're printing it, and now it brings up the sales enter form, and you can see that in the previous context I showed you, where somebody in the office is sitting down at the stack of invoices to report, she has to type all this information in. Here it's filled it in for me because it's already got the information, so it doesn't need to ask me for it. I can just hit enter and confirm the entry. Now in this case, it wasn't set up as a bill job, and it's telling me it can't find the money, so actually I'm going to reconsider, and I'm going to change that to a 2, making it a bill job, and we'll suppose we're billing. Well, see, it wasn't set up for a separate billing party is the problem, so this wasn't really realistic. Amount paid to date is 0. Hit enter, and oh, I didn't even have the full address in the thing. It checks everything to make sure it's all acceptable, and now it's ready to print the ticket. It's made the sales entry and so on. So my whole point of showing you this is we call this the integrated processes system. It's an optional way you can do things. Again, it's optional. You can go back to that form. You can check this or not check. Actually, I'm going to uncheck it here. Or not check it, as you prefer, and it just depends on whether you prefer to sort of integrate the sequence of things when you're doing the post-action report and the job's done, versus not integrating it. Another little possibility is, going back to the finish form, I can right-click here. Wait a minute now. Yeah, I can right-click here, and you notice that turned to kind of a red color. This is in case you don't want to integrate your processes from the post-action report, but let's say on any time I do a custom form, I want to link from here directly to the sales center. Well, by doing that, I've made it so anytime I print or transmit a custom form, that's exactly what will happen. I'm going to set that back. It's just telling me what I'm doing here. So you can read in more detail about your manual, but those are the integrated processes that tie things together. Probably more useful if you're a small 1 or 2 man operation. If you're a 4 or 5 plus man operation, I'm guessing it's easier to have a person doing all the post-action reports in one batch, have a person doing all the claims in one batch, and doing all the sales entries in a separate batch. But anyway, I wanted you to see that. With that, we're ready to move to the third and last subsection in this tutorial. Again, it's actually the B in Chapter 8 of your manual, but we reverse that with C for tutorial purposes. And this has to do with managing accounts receivable. You may recall that when we did a pay code 2 entry from the sales enter form, signifying that it was a bill job, the system created an accounts receivable record for us one of these. Managing accounts receivable is obviously very important because if you don't manage them, you probably won't get paid on them, and or at least paid on a fraction of them, and that can cost you a lot of money and really eat up your profitability. So it's real important. We've made it pretty darn simple in Service Desk. Basically, each accounts receivable that you have is represented by a record as shown in this form. I can hit page up here and I can look through my multiple records. You might notice here it's giving me the record number, and so I can see it actually shows me the most recent when I first bring up the form. So when I see record number 278 there, I instantly know there's 278 accounts receivables here in the accounts receivable file. I can use the standard key combination of Service Desk control page up to look at the first one, page down, control page down to look at the last one, and so on. And we have all the pertinent information pertaining to the accounts receivable, the technician that did it, the invoice number, the invoice date, and so on. We have various search facilities, name search, invoice number search, and so on. I've also got some buttons here to go to the top, bottom, and so on, but really your keypad works better for those things. And of course we have the merchandise sold amount, parts sold amount, service call amount, labor, sales tax, total, which of course corresponds with the same columns here. Only here it's having to do with the receivable, with what we're still expecting to be paid on. We have the paid to date column that shows whatever was paid to date. So the status of each of your receivables is viewable here. And the next question is, actually there's a couple more questions. I suppose the one we should deal with first is, what do you do about receivables that the payment hasn't come in as soon as you thought the payment should come in? Well, for that we have this form here, which I bring up by hitting Control F3, that we call the, what do we call this? The dunning form, because its purpose is to create dunning letters or billing reminders, statements, whatever you want to call them. You can do it in either of two categories. Basically, our thinking is that for your high volume clients, like your manufacturers that you do warranty work for, home warranty companies, and so on, those types of companies you probably don't want to be sending the same kind of billing reminder to as you do just a regular, more regular person that you've billed. I don't know about you. In my service business, our policy was strict COD, except for high volume clients like the type I just mentioned, or for landlord tenants. We regularly billed landlord tenants, so we built up a few of receivables with those. Anyway, if it's come to that time of month, or maybe do it twice a month, whatever, that you want to send out reminders on all your receivables that are past due, you'd bring up this Control F3 form. I'm just dragging it up here, and click on Standard Dunning, and this shows you a list of all the items that are 30 days or more past due. You see right here it has the actual invoice date, of course invoice number, reference to the name, and so on. This column right here indicates how many billing reminders you've sent the party previously. These records, by the way, are the same records as you can find in here. One difference is, in this form you're only seeing one record at a time. Let me go back to this form here. You're only seeing one record at a time, and you can page through them. Here it's showing you several records in line format on a page, and you can hit page down and you can look through multiple such pages. Looks like we got 40. These are just item numbers here. We have a total of 40 items that are past due. That are past due to non-high volume clients, and you can see most of them are relatively recent. We have some here that are quite old. Again, you got to pretend that we got a date here of April 19, 2000. So anyway, we can review this list and decide to whom we wish to send billing reminders, and that's the purpose for this last column here. You might wonder why American Home Shield is in here. We were doing board repairs for American Home Shield that weren't part of the normal American Home Shield work, so we didn't classify them as a high volume client for this purpose. We just did a few jobs, and for some reason we had a hard time getting paid on them because it was a different accounting thing with them or something. Anyway, I don't want to send them a reminder because they always do pay within a while at least. So I just clicked on the Y there, which stood for yes, and it changed it to no, so I'm not going to include them. And as I look through here, well, this is actually my secretary's mom. I know my secretary will probably just want to deal with that with her personally. So I'll mark that for no and so on. So I just review through here and decide who I want to send notices to. I don't think I will these people. I think I'm going to turn these people over to collections. So I'll say no for those. They've already had 5 notices, you see. These guys have had 4. I'll try them one more time. And then I'll just click on Create File. And up comes a standard Windows Open File dialog box. And it's suggesting a name and location I could use. I could specify something different if I wanted. And different location, different name, whatever I want to do. And when I'm ready, I'll just click on Save. And it goes ahead and creates a file that has that information ready for me to create my dunning letters or billing reminders into. It's giving me a little summary here of the kind of file I created. It's also asking me if I want to notch up these numbers here, which we call the notice value, which indicates how many letters have been given in the past. I wouldn't want to say yes if I was just experimenting. I'd only want to say yes if in fact I was mailing letters, and then the numbers would be notched up to show that in fact I'd mailed letters to those people, and so on. Anyway, where do you go to from there? All we've done at this point is created a file. We haven't actually created any letters. Well, Service Desk doesn't create the letters or statements for you in and of itself. It simply created that file. The expectation being you may want to have your statements or letters done in one format or in a different format. And you can simply use the Merge Mail feature in Microsoft Word if that's your word processor, or in WordPerfect if that's what you like, to create the kind of document you want, and then merge that file we just created here with that document to make each of your statements or billing reminders, whatever you want to call them. I'll briefly show you how that's done in Word. Okay, I've minimized Service Desk. I'm going to click on my shortcut to Word here to start Word. And then I want to open a file. Oh, by the way, I said we leave it to you so you can create whatever kind of document you want. Well, that's absolutely true, but we also don't intend to leave you helpless in case you don't want to be stuck with the task of creating a document. In fact, we provide you with 2 documents set up to do very nice billing reminders in Word. And what I'm going to do is open one of those. I'm going to select Open here, and I've got to go to my C drive and the SD folder. Service Desk will have installed these 2 documents for you, dunningenvelope.doc and dunning letter type doc in the SD folder on your C drive. I'm going to double click on dunning letter here, and up comes this little dialog box in Word that says Find Data Source. I'll click on that, and then I'm going to go back to the very same location, drive C, SD folder. SD, by the way, is the folder all your Service Desk files are put in. And in that little utility that I showed you back here, the file name that we created was DoneList, and in fact we put it in the SD folder. So, and here it is right here. So I'll simply double click on that. It finds that file, and based on that, it is presently ready to create a series of dunning letters for me. Sometimes Word's a little bit unpredictable. I can sort of go through here, and Word's kind of funny. Actually, what I'm going to do here, I'm going to click on this ABC button, and it's going to fill in all the items for me. And you see, you got a record number right here. You can see how it's going to make each letter based on what was created in the file. You see, it fills in all the information for you. All you got to do is really print. There's several ways you could do this. If you want to just print one of the letters, you could just bring it up by making that the active record number and click on this ABC so it fills in everything, and fill it in. But more typically, you're probably going to have 10, 20, 30, 40 of these. And what you want to do is come over here to the Merge to Printer button. You click on that, and it will print out the entire series of letters for you with all the text appropriately filled in. And it's just that easy. It's that easy to create your set of billing reminders, dunning letters, statements, whatever you want to call them. the document, the master document that we've created here, by the way, for the mail merge context, is set up so that it will list multiple receivables like this if they're multiples, or just a single if it's a single, and print them as such. Wow, that person has a lot. And show this kind of information. And the letter gets increasingly strident depending on how many previous reminders have been sent. In fact, this oldest item here, you can say, as you may note, this item is now 545 days old. Ooh, at this point I must insist that in a realistic scenario, of course, you would never let them get that old. But anyway, in fact, this is the last warning I can give you. If the amount is not paid within the next week, I'm under obligation to follow internal policy and turn the matter over to collections. So anyway, they get increasingly strident as time goes by, seeking to persuade the person to send in their payment. But again, this is just a master document that we provide for you. You can create whatever kind of master document you wish, and simply use the merge facility to produce the ultimate printed output for mailing to your customers that you want. You might have noticed, by the way, this is the actual document that makes the text of the letters. We also provide for you another document called Dunning envelope, and again, it's wanting us to find the data source. The Dunning envelope document will attach to the same data source. Will basically create address the envelopes for you. The little task you have to do is simply put your own actual business name and address up here in the corner. Revise the document in that fashion, because of course we couldn't do that for you. But you see, it creates all the documents just as easy as can be. And again, you'd typically probably want to do the merge to printer, which will make all the envelopes on your printer for you. So that's basically how that happens. I'll escape out of here. No, I don't want to save. No, I don't want to save. And we'll come back here to Service Desk, and that's how that's done. Now, again, I mentioned for your high volume clients, that's what HVC stands for, by the way, is high volume clients. You'll probably want to do it differently. You click on that, it will give you a list of your high volume clients. Now, this list, in case you may have forgotten, I'll go to a call sheet here, comes from your quick entry templates. If you make a quick entry template for any particular client and you give them an abbreviation here, that abbreviation signifies to the system that that person is a high volume client and that they should be treated accordingly. Anyway, you can click on an item here. It gives you a summary of what the receivable status is from that high volume client, and asks if you want to print a Dunning letter. If you say yes, get that back up to the front there. It asks what the cutoff is in terms of days since billed for items you want to include in the notice. You can put whatever number you want and hit on OK, and it will print a letter. This letter, by the way, is done entirely within Service Desk, and it's pre-formatted within Service Desk. Here we've not given you the flexibility that we gave you in regard to your standard letters. So anyway, that's how that's done, and that's how you take care of your billing reminders to either standard customers or your high volume clients. I'll go ahead and escape out of there, bring that up over the front. We still have that occasional overlap going on there with call sheets. Okay, where do we go next? Well, I guess the last thing we need to show you for this tutorial is how you check in payments when they're received on a account receivable item. You might recall that typically payments that come in before a job is completed are reported via the post-action report process. Although they can come in alternatively, I might just mention quickly. Let's suppose somebody brings in a check on a pending job, and you're not making a post-action report on it. You can just come right here to enter funds received and do it that way and escape out of here. But most typically it'll be through the post-action report, which, just to review quickly, you can use this form for the post-action report, or you can use this form for the post-action report, or after the job is done, and in that case it will be applied to this account receivable. But how do you check it in? Well, previously we showed you the funds form, or funds journal form, and this basically is where it is done. If you look over here, you see one of the options is to receive, we've abbreviated here to make things fit, but receive payment on formerly billed jobs. Job or jobs, that's the reason for the parenthesis. Again, I hope the abbreviation doesn't confuse you too much, but that's what it stands for. Receive payment on formerly billed jobs. In other words, we use this option to check in a payment that we received on a job that was previously completed, recorded to the sales journal, and as part of that process, it was billed out. So here we are, and you know what? I did fix that problem, but I forgot to bring the new code over to this computer where I'm doing that. Oh well. Okay, so you simply click here, and the system asks you to indicate the kind of fund that you've received. Most often in this context, it's going to be a check. People seldom pay afterwards, after the job's completed, with a bank or cash card. Asked you to enter the name of the paying party. Let's suppose we're receiving a check from American Home Shield. I'm going to capitalize that. Serial number on the check, whatever that number happens to be. And then it asks you to indicate the amount. Let's suppose the amount on the check is $151, so I type that in. No need to do the cents unless there were in fact cents there. Hit enter on my keyboard, and it's basically proposing an entry here to check from American Home Shield, check number for $151. It's not applying it to any specific invoice number, which would go in this slot here, because we haven't indicated any invoice number yet. And in fact, we're about to indicate multiple invoice numbers, so it's going to keep that as 0 because it's not any particular single invoice number it will turn out that this check applies to. Now it's asking us to indicate an invoice number this payment applies to. So what I would have done ahead of time, by the way, when I got this check from American Home Shield, is I would have gone to the stack where I keep the copy of the invoice that represents the accounts receivable, because you should keep such a stack, basically. So you got a copy of the ticket, probably the copy that you keep regardless, that is waiting for final payment on. You go to that stack. You may have it categorized into various categories, of course, but at any rate, you locate the particular items that check was in payment for, and you'll sit down with that set of items. And basically here it's asking you to indicate the invoice number from the first such item. So I'll type in that invoice number, 50113, and it's located the actual receivable record that pertains to that invoice number. It's asking me to confirm that that's the correct item that this check is, at least in part, to satisfy. I'll say yes, or I can just hit yes on my keyboard. And then it's noting that the amount actually outstanding, because 35 of the 83 has already been paid, is $48. It asked me to confirm that that amount from this check should in fact be applied against that receivable. I'll say yes. And then it's proposing to make a new entry into, remember this was the sales enter form here in purple, into the sales enter form for me here. And you might notice this is going to be a pay code 3 form. Earlier I showed you that pay code 1 means the job was completed and paid for by the time it was completed. A 2 means it was completed and billed. Well, we have a new kind of sales journal entry here, which is a pay code 3, which indicates that a formerly billed job has now been paid. So a little structural thing you might notice is that a COD job, or a job that got paid for before you recorded it as being completed, gets a single entry in here as a pay code 1. A billed job, assuming it eventually gets paid, always has 2 entries. It has a pay code 2 to show it was billed, and then a pay code 3 to indicate it was eventually paid for. So anyway, it's proposing to make this pay code 3 entry for me in the sales journal. I'll go ahead and say yes, because that makes perfect sense. It's created a line here that it's applied $48 on invoice number 5013, which happened to be payment in full against that check, which leaves 103 remaining on that check, and it's asking me for the next invoice number. So I'll type in the next invoice number in my little stack that I found that check was supposed to apply to. And again, it does the same thing, located the particular receivable for me. I'm actually just hitting enter on my keyboard here because the default is yes. Outstanding balance is 79. Should that amount be applied? Yes. Make that entry to the sales journal? Yes. As you start doing this, you go through it real fast, obviously. And then another one, we still have 24 available in that check with that last application. And I go to another invoice. Actually, this is the last invoice in my little stack here. Correct receivable, yes, yes, yes. And look at that, we've got 0 still available. Those were in fact the 3 receivables that AHS intended for that check to apply to. Everything balances. And it's still asking me the next question, indicating invoice this payment should be applied to, but it also says, or hit escape to terminate this sequence. So I'll hit escape, and it's asking me, are you ready to record this money receipt along with its indicated accounts receivable applications and resulting sales journal entries? I'll say yes, and it has done exactly that. We could go here, and we're down at the very bottom of this page now. Here's those 3 pay code 3 entries. If we looked up, if we went to the F3 form, and we looked up a particular one of those, like say I'll go to this one. Oh, I must have typed it in wrong. Invoice number, search, 50113. Okay, you see it's made the pay to date amount 83, which means this one is no longer truly a receivable, and the next time the archive routine runs, this record will be basically deleted because it's no longer true receivable. So that's how that works. And if we go here to the funds journal form, and you look at the very bottom entry there, you'll see that the check that we received from American Home Shield is right there in the bottom like it ought to be, showing that we received that check for $151. And so all those different things are documented for you in consequence of the process you did receiving the payment on the formerly billed job. Let's suppose we got a check from Fidelity National Home Warranty. Again, I'll do receive payments, checks. We use an initial of FNW for them, and serial number, whatever it happens to be, on the check. The amount, let's suppose the check is for $41. We're making this one little to make it simple. Indicate an invoice number to which it should be applied. 65095. It's asking me if that's the correct receivable. Yes. And in this case, it's asking me to it's not assuming an amount. It's asking me to indicate the amount that should be applied. And the reason why is I've only got $41 available, and there's $41.07 due. Why don't I go ahead here and say $41, because that's all they've actually given me. I couldn't really say more. Well, it's noting that the amounts are close, and it's asking me saying if wanted, you may draw from an errors and discrepancies account to make up the 7-cent difference between 41. And I don't want to keep this account receivable open for 7 cents, and I don't want to be bothered bugging Fidelity for the 7 cents. So I'm going to say yes, and that basically means we're indicating payment in full. So we'll approve that, and basically we got 0 still available, and I'm going to hit escape to terminate the sequence because that was the only one we were applying on this check. I'm going to say yes, we want to record. And on this occasion, it's asking me to create asking me to either create or apply that 7 cents to an errors and discrepancies account. Now let me explain quickly what that is. You'll occasionally have instances like this where things don't balance, and you basically need to do something with the imbalance to keep it properly accounted for, assuming that you don't want to bother refunding a few pennies difference that you might have had extra, or bothering the person that's paying you for the difference. For that purpose, we use what's called this errors and discrepancies account. You can create different errors and discrepancies account for different clients. You can have a miscellaneous one for all the rest of your clients. In this case, we already have one created for Fidelity FNW, so I just want to apply it to that one. And it's telling me that their balance in their errors and discrepancies account is now $654.73. Wow, it looks like over time we've collected significantly more from them than we really thought they were we had due from them. So that's another nice thing about this, is it helps you keep track of if you have a particular payer that's consistently under or consistently over, of how you're doing over time with them. By the way, you can also go to the Journal of Applications, which I showed you a moment ago, and you can show an EDA for any particular client and see where you stand with them. Let's see how we stood with GE. We were 662 in the red with GE before we finally fired them, essentially. So anyway, that's how the errors and discrepancies account system works. And I think with that, with that, I was going to say we're ready to conclude this tutorial, but there's one more thing we ought to cover, and that's reports. Based on this, these different elements of accounting that we're doing in regard to our completed sales and our accounts receivable and so on, we can do a number of reports, for which purpose we'd want to bring up the reports form. The most significant report in that regard is the sales summary. Why don't we see what we'd done in my business. We'll show it on the monitor here rather than the printer. Through 419, actually 419 sales probably weren't in, so it's probably more like through 417 or so. During the month of April of 2000. Produce report. We've got different columns here. This is for your work actually completed, which is always different than the work you get paid for, which is what this column is for. And these columns is sort of supplementary, show you how the math is working to go into these first two columns. Anyway, we had total sales in terms of the work we completed of $18,719. Sales tax amount. This is the amount of money we actually brought in during that period. This is how much our accounts receivable changed, and so on. We got a few statistical figures here of interest, quantity of service calls, averages, and so on that are all interesting and informative. You might notice some of these figures are underlined. The reason we've underlined these is to just help you know these are the particular figures that you'll need to make an entry into your accounting system, probably QuickBooks for most of you, informing QuickBooks of this revenue side activity that took place in Service Desk. So that's the sales report. A whole bunch of other reports available here. You can do commissions if you wish. There's an accounts receivable report that summarizes your accounts receivable. Of course, you had other reports available back here, in particular for your high volume clients. So at any rate, those are the reports you can do based on the kind of work that we've shown you in this chapter. And that concludes this chapter. Thank you very much.